Okay, so this is really where we're getting into the nitty gritty. And the thing that you need to kind of zoom out to understand why we're going through it this way is because interpreting a chart is about synthesizing all of the information, the planets plus the sign plus the house plus the aspects. So when you're interpreting the sun, for example, so I'm going to use mine just because I can think of that off the top of my head. It's not just Scorpio sun. We think, okay, there's a Scorpio sun. It is conjunct the south node, conjunct the moon, widely conjunct Saturn. This will make sense later, in the third house in Scorpio. And you're putting all of that together to interpret the sun, which is why I'm not like every other Scorpio and you're not like every other whatever your sign is, plus the whole rest of the chart. So when we talk about how in-depth astrology is, that gives you a little bit of a perspective, right? Like we have to go through all of that. So now you guys know how to pull up a chart. We're going to talk about the basic layout of quadrants, hemispheres, angles, personal planets. I'm going to make this make sense. Okay, so on your first, it will be slide number 2. On the second slide, so we're going to talk about quadrants. And really, quadrants are breaking that circle chart into 4 parts, whereas hemispheres are breaking it into 2, but there's 4 hemispheres. That'll make more sense on the next slide. We'll get to it. Okay, so if you look at your second slide here, the quadrants, it really gives you an idea of where the emphasis is lying in a chart. Now, some people, a lot of you will have planets that are falling in a lot of different areas of your chart, but we're still going to be able to say, well, here's where the emphasis in this area is. For example, because people are familiar with their sun, which is your vitality, your willpower, your ego in the Freudian sense, because I don't know if you guys know what I mean when I say that, but we have our super ego, kind of our higher self. We have our ego, which is where we kind of operate all the time, our kind of core personality. I don't love that explanation, but still it helps articulate it. And then the subconscious, which is the id. Is it normal to only have one little symbol in the entirety? Absolutely. In astrology, everything is normal. You will have outliers, things that are unique that we don't see as frequently. However, charts are as unique as people because your chart is not creating you. It is merely, it's like looking into a mirror. It's a reflection of what is already there. So that's completely normal. Yeah. No, but you're not normal, Jen. You're exceptional. Okay, all of you are exceptional. All right, so the first quadrant, if you look on this slide, you'll see it. It is going to encompass the first 3 houses, houses 1, 2, and 3. And hopefully you guys all see that you guys all have your slide, right? You can see it. If you can't see it, you can look later, or you can just look at a chart. Just know the first quadrant, it is going to be houses 1, 2, and 3. And this is really the crux of me, okay? Because the first house is so much about the physical body, our approach, how we are viewing the world, and it's self, it's me, the first house. The second house is our values, our money, our security, but still me, because it's what I value, it's what I own, right? And then the third house is the house of communication, and predominantly communication, reasoning, thinking, and that is, okay, so how I think. So basically who I am, what I own, and how I think. So there's your first quadrant. And so it says here, self-development, self-centered. Now, one thing I need to say about astrology is when we say certain terms like self-centered, we have connotations in the English language for what that means. That's not what we mean. We're not meaning this means you're self-centered because you have houses in that quadrant. That means that the focus of that quadrant is on the self. Independence, and yeah, the questions are great. Who am I? House 1. What do I value? House 2. And what do I think? House 3. Okay, so then we move to the second quadrant, and that's going to be houses 4, 5, and 6. So the second quadrant is so much about where it's a developmental, how do we function in the world? Because so the first quadrant is just me. The second quadrant is how am I going to function? How am I going to do the stuff? That was a great explanation, right? The fourth house has, it is our home. It is our domestic life. It is our roots. It is our upbringing. I'm really curious, Jen, about your fourth house, because mine, I have Uranus in my fourth house, which I have moved a lot, particularly in my childhood. But I had a very unusual childhood. But people who tend to have more, your ninth house too, we'd have to look at it, because since you travel full time and you've done that for a long time, I'm curious about your fourth house. But anyway, I digress. Fourth house is home, roots, family of origin, what life was like for you when you were growing up. So maybe we have to look at the ruler of the fourth, but Jen, if there's nothing in it, we would look at the ruler. The fifth house is recreation and procreation. So anything that falls under creativity, art, music, expression, sports, leisurely kind of activities, love affairs, not our long-term permanent partnership like marriage, but you know, all those homies you dated back in the day, right? That's your fifth house. It is also your children are going to fall under that. Propensities. Now, we're not going to worry about empty houses. I'm going to make all that make sense later, so don't get stressed out about those. But children are going to fall under the fifth house as well. The sixth house is the house of health and our day-to-day routines. So what we do day in and day out, how well are we going to do with those routines? How consistent do we find value and joy in those routines? Also, health issues. Our physical body is the first house because that rules so much of our appearance and our physical self, but the sixth house is our health. So down here, our little slideshow that I put together. So proud of myself making Google Slides. The developing awareness outside of self. And so, okay, family, so fourth house, children, fifth house, and coworkers, sixth house, our daily routine. So our day-to-day work is the sixth house. Hold that in your brain, because I'm going to get to something else in a minute, and you'll have to make that fit. We'll make it work. We'll make it work. I'll explain it. So the little questions, perfect. What do I feel? I don't love that question. I think it's more like, where do I belong for the fourth house? Okay. The fifth house, what is it? It's so tiny. I'm like old lady. I need reading glasses, Kat. What do I will and what do I analyze? Okay, I see where they're getting this. I do. Because you can, there's an argument about it in astrology, but you can superimpose the natural order of signs onto the houses. The order of the zodiac, zodiacal order. It starts with Aries and it ends with Pisces. So we can think Aries energy, first house, Taurus energy, second house, okay, so on and so forth. I don't want to get bogged down in that right now because we're going to go over the signs later. Okay, third quadrant, so angular house now, seventh house. So the seventh house, predominantly, we're going to be looking at marriage and marriage-like relationships. The reason I have to say marriage-like relationships is because we live in a time that people may do life together, They may have a partner in their life that they do not formally marry, but they may do everything else that would be, if you're with somebody for 15 years, I don't care if they live across town, that is, or across the country, that is still going to fall under the 7th house. It's a long-term one-on-one partnership. So you also can put your very close, hear me well when I say this, your very close friendships. Those friends that you go, this is like my sister, this is like my brother, this is my human. That's 7th house, one-on-one partnerships. It also is going to, and I know I'm getting in a little bit into the houses, and I kind of wanted to save that for later, but we'll go under some of that later. We'll go over that when we do houses. But interesting is we also put legality, counseling, because a counselor is going to work one-on-one with somebody. A lawyer is going to work a lot of times one-on-one with a client, and open enemies, people don't like you, 7th house. But this 3rd quadrant is so much about how we begin to form relationships with other people. So that's why the 7th house is so very, very important. The 8th house is you'd think I'd be so good at it because it's Scorpio's house, right? But the 8th house is a tough house. The 8th and the 12th are really tough houses to grasp, especially the 12th. But the 8th house is traditionally, in traditional astrology, because most of us are used to modern astrology. Traditional astrology is going to tell you that this is about sex, deep, intimate sex, not fun, let's have a roll in the hay, 5th house, that's 5th house sex. Intimacy is going to be 8th house. Death and other people's money. So inheritances, taxes, things of that nature are going to fall into the 8th house. And then the 9th house is our higher mind. So religion, philosophy, foreign culture, travel is going to be 9th house. So this is, we're working ourselves out into the world with the 3rd quadrant. So this is developing awareness about society, relationships, partnerships, intimacy. How do I balance myself with others? What do I lust after and desire? And what do I see out there? How am I viewing that? And then we move into the 4th quadrant, which is the angular house is going to be the 10th house. And the 10th house is an extremely important house. So all those angular houses are very important. There's an emphasis on those, and you'll understand why as we work more through all this information. But this is about our public, how we function in the world, how we are publicly seen. So 10th house, a lot of times we talk about career for the 10th house, because in this day and age, what the public usually sees, I mean, we live in this Western culture where one of the first questions, and I hate this, but it's true, is that people say, what do you do? And what they mean is, what do you do for a living? How do you make money? What is your status? It's our nice little American way of saying, yeah, what's your status? What's your class? You know what I mean? How valuable are you in this world? I'm going to try to get off my soapbox, but that's the 10th house. It's the 10th house is our career and our public persona, our public image. The 11th house is our community, like our friendships, our organizations. If people are involved in volunteer work, in churches, in schools, that's all going to fall under the 11th house. It is also where we would talk about our friendships. Now, I said with the 7th house, our one-on-one friendships are like, this is my soul sister, right? Or my soul brother or whatever. That's going to be our 7th house. But when we're having a big function where a lot of people are getting together and we're just having a good time, and it's just, you know what I mean? We're not having that deep, intimate connection, just friendships. That would be our 11th house. And then the 12th. And The 12th house is such a tough one, and I actually am going to ask you a question, Kat, so I want you to think about how to answer it, because I'm going to give you a second to think, because you have a pretty heavy emphasis in your 12th house, and I want to know if you have any insight about it to share with us. So the 12th house is about the beyond. You too, Christina. Absolutely. If you want to share any tidbits on how you view the 12th house. The 12th house is the beyond the veil. And traditional astrology called it the house of self-undoing. It is where we will fuck ourselves, okay? But it's also an extremely spiritual house. It's a very intuitive house. It looks beyond what is this regular, everyday 3D space that we are in. But I was listening to a podcast probably about a month ago where a very, what's the word? Well known is not the word, respected, I suppose. Astrologer was talking about the 12th house. And he said, if anyone tells you that they know and understand the 12th house, don't listen to them. Because that's like saying, I understand how the universe works. It is not meant for us to totally grasp it. It's a tough house. True. Tend to daydream a lot. Very sensitive also. Feel bad for everyone all the time. You have a very big heart. And I think Kat could probably relate to that too, because she is such a mama, to everyone. She wants to hold space and take care of everyone. And she has a very big emphasis in the 12th. What's interesting, and I think a lot of times, at least for me, having practical examples to understand things is having, seeing how it's functioning. So like Kat, for example, are you still here, Kat? I don't know if she's still here. What do you have? You have Sun, and I want to say Mercury. I feel like there's something else there, but they're in Sagittarius, which is all about truth and knowledge. And she is fascinated with ancient culture and what'd you say? Personally, small talk is difficult. Yes, I tend to swim in a deep end to an annoying degree, and service is how I show love. Yes. Okay, so hemispheres. If you look at the slide number 3, this is going to give you a really quick way to determine, when you look at a chart, if they have a predominance of planets in a particular quadrant or hemisphere, some quick things about their personality. So I want you guys to be thinking about this for your own charts. And if we have a little bit of time at the end of this, we will discuss what kind of things you came up with thinking about where your planets are. It's messed up. I have to force myself to feel every second. I mean, you also have an Earth moon, so they're a little more level anyway. So yeah, I think you're crushing it. You're doing great. Okay, so hemispheres, I really like hemispheres. I use this almost, you'll get to the point when you're looking at charts that this becomes second nature to you, because you'll see a ton of planets, for example, in the Eastern hemisphere. Okay, I'm going to back up for a second. Do you guys notice how everything is upside down and backwards from where you would think north, south, east, west is? It took me months. I think it actually took me somebody pointing it out to me before I go, oh yeah, it is upside down and backwards, because I do cardiac ultrasound. And when you do an adult echo, everything is upside down and backwards. That's how we do them. And so I'm always used to going, yeah, the left side is on the right side's on, the up is down, and it's just my brain does that automatically. So when I saw it astrologically, I'm just like, that checks out. But when you see like a ton of planets over on the Eastern hemisphere, you're like, this is a very independent person. This is somebody very focused on what they want to do, who they are. You're not going to boss them around. You're not going to tell them, what's what. They might be a little bit more like, hey, I know this is a big deal to you, like that you want me to go to this dinner at 7 on Thursday, but like, I got to wash my hair, man. Like whatever the thing is, there's more independence to it. But I have all of these, listed out here. So Eastern Hemisphere, Western Hemisphere, so more over towards the right side of the chart, is going to be more adaptable, more focused on relationships, more focused on other people. And I don't want to say that they're always easygoing, because that's not true. We can't make some blanket statement, but they're typically going to be more focused on the you and relational. Okay. The Northern Hemisphere. Now this one, when I was putting together the slideshow and looking for pictures, and I was just grazing over people's explanations. This is one thing that I really disagree with, and this is one of the reasons that I think learning astrology from someone teaching it to you like this is so very, very valuable. You can always go read the books. You can always go watch the YouTube channels and take in what is meaningful to you. But this is why, because you guys chose for me to teach you. And I'm incredibly grateful that you've put that trust in me. Because this is the kind of stuff that you're going to get, that you're not going to just get in a book, that you're actually, I feel like, is going to be inaccurate. So the Northern Hemisphere, a lot of people, thanks, Christina. A lot of people will say that if you have a lot in the Northern Hemisphere, the lower half of the chart, that those people tend to be introverted, and that people who have a lot in the top half of their chart will be extroverted. Scale of 1 through 10, especially those of you who have met me in real life, but I think all of you have watched me live enough. 10 being the most extroverted and 1 being the most introverted. How introverted am I? You don't have to really answer that, but I'm not introverted. I am an utter, complete extrovert. Yes, I need my time alone. Everybody does, but I'm an extrovert through and through. And I have nothing as far as planets in my Southern Hemisphere, the top of my chart. It's all Northern Hemisphere. It's all the bottom of my chart. So that's not, you can't make a statement like, oh, this is an introverted person because of that, or this is an extroverted person because it's all up there. What I would say instead, and this is the language that I used on the slide, was introspection. There is absolutely, with people who have a lot going on down in the bottom of their chart, more emphasis on introspection. They're typically people who are concerned with being self-aware or understanding themselves, figuring out who am I and why do I think this way, and they can be kind of in their head about their thoughts and feelings and values and beliefs and all of that. This explains a thing or two. And then the opposite with, so I put also the unconscious or the private. Okay, so that's a great thing, because for you to understand with astrology is, it's just like human beings. It is complex because it's reflecting complexity. So Jen, same. It's reflecting that complexity. So when we get down into the planets and the houses and all of that and the aspects, you'll start to see how it all comes together and says, well, yeah, Jen may be this way in one matter of her life, but she might be this way in a different part of her life. Because none of us are gonna, like, I'm not the same with on live as I am when I go over to Kat's house and she cooks me amazing food, as I am with my kids, as I am with a lover. I'm gonna be different in all of those, and so will all of you. But the private part, where private part, okay, where I'm private for the Northern Hemisphere, they do tend to keep a little bit more to themselves, even if it seems like they're very open and extroverted. Okay, that doesn't mean that you're seeing everything. So Southern Hemisphere, emphasis on sociability, the community, the public. Where is curious, Jen, what's your predominant hemisphere? Because you said you have like a lot in one area. It's much more conscious. It's much more played out in the day-to-day, where you're going to see how these people are functioning a little bit more depending on the sign, depending on the house, depending on the aspects, you're going to see a little bit more than if it is in the southern hemisphere. But again, we can't make any general statements with astrology. There's kind of a naughty term that we call it cookbook astrology, which is where you say, oh, well, Venus in Taurus means this. And astrologers will go, what house is it in? What is it ruling? What aspects are it making? Is it making? We're going to go into all that stuff. Okay, let's go to our angles. Now here we're getting really, this is where I get excited. Okay, I'm like, oh good, we got that stuff done. Let's get exciting. This is exciting. I think it's exciting. We have angles in astrology because that makes sense, because it's a wheel, it's a circle. Angles, it's just amusing to me. Though the chart is a circle, I wrote this, we regard the 4 points in the chart as being highly important. They indicate the beginning of each quadrant. So remember I said the first house, the fourth house, the seventh house, the 10th house are angular houses. The reason is because they are where, you know, that angle starts, that the cusp. Cusp means the beginning of the sign, the house, whichever house system you're using, okay? It's the beginning. It doesn't, at the end of this lesson, I'm gonna give my there's no such thing as cusps speech. Hold please. Most of you probably heard it. Okay, so the first one is the ascendant. And this is why exact birth times are so important, because the ascendant changes signs roughly every 2.5 hours. And all the way around, we have 360 degrees, a circle, and each house is 30 degrees. So if you have a rising sign, an ascendant, your rising sign at like 2 degrees of something, and you're like, I was born around this time, here's what's going to happen if you're wrong. If it's actually a different sign, it is going to shift your entire chart, all the houses, therefore all the rulers. So when I say all the rulers, I'm going to say this quickly, and we're going to go into it where it makes sense and you can really grasp it later. But essentially when I said don't worry about empty houses, there's always going to be a sign that is ruling that house, okay? It's the sign that is at the beginning, at the cusp of that house. Does that make sense? It's the sign that's at the beginning. Not that fills up the majority of it, but it is at the beginning. That's the sign that rules that house. So for example, if you have an empty 7th house and you want to see, like I have an empty 7th house, and you want to see describe one-on-one partnerships and marriages for me, I'm going to look at what is at the cusp, what's at the beginning of the 7th house. For me, that's Pisces, which means I'm going to go, okay, now I have to look at the ruler. In this case, there's going to be 2. Again, we'll get to this later. I'm going to go look at the rulers of that sign, Jupiter and Neptune, and I'm going to see what they're doing, and that's going to tell me what's happening with my 7th house. So I went on a tangent. Somebody back me up and tell me where I was. The rising sign. Oh, so that's why if you have your birth time off and it hasn't been corrected, which we call that rectification, if it hasn't been corrected by an astrologer or you haven't verified it through your birth certificate or something, it's going to throw things off that much. You might be going, here's what's going on with my marriage or marriages and partnerships, but actually you're looking at your work, your day-to-day routine, your health, 6th house stuff. So it's a big fucking deal when people don't have astrologers. Most of them that I know will say, I would rather pull a chart without the birth time at all and just put it in as unknown and don't even worry about that part of it, where you won't know the rising sign and you won't know the angles, and they'll just focus on the planets and the signs and the aspects. They will do that as opposed to pulling in an accurate birth time. There's a hell of a big difference between 15 minutes. Absolutely. Now go plug both of them in on your chart and see if it shifts any of the planets or your rising sign into different houses. If it changes the cusps or the planets, just play with it, and that's what I would do. If it doesn't change them, then you're okay to just work with it, except for the fact that if you get into traditional astrology and you start pulling lots and you start doing zodiacal releasing, and now I'm speaking French, that's going to get a little complex. The vertex, that's going to be a really important one. There's going to be certain things that will get screwy, but mostly you should be okay. All right. Along that horizontal line, we have the ascendant or rising sign, and then we have the descendant. So here's how I want you to think of this. The ascendant or your rising sign is the most you place in the whole chart. It is the most sensitive to who you are. It is your approach. It is your physical appearance. Now remember, there's going to be aspects to it. There's going to be things that modify it, okay? But it is the most pivotal as far as how am I going to approach the world. I describe it this way. It is the lens through which you're going to view the world and how people, when they first meet you, are going to view you. I personally do not refer to it as the mask that we wear. A lot of people, modern astrology, will say that. I hate that because, and yes, I just use such a strong word like hate, because that gives the idea that it is just some mask that we put on that's not us. It's play pretend. It's not really who we are. Oh, yes, it is. It is very much who you are. So I don't like the term mask. I like lens through which I view the world and how the world views me, or your approach and your physical. And when I say approach, I mean your physical approach, your how you're going to function in the world. It's a big deal. It's the I in the chart. And it is what sets up all of the houses. That birth time, it sets up all the houses because it sets up your ascendant. So what is not me, the ascendant or rising sign, is you, the descendant. So it's exactly opposite on that horizontal line. The descendant is so important for relationships. Primarily, it is going to focus on our romantic life, just like the seventh house is going to predominantly talk about, for most people, marriage, long-term partnerships. But it can absolutely talk about the other kind of things that we were just discussing with the seventh house, like, you know, our best friend, our very, 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 very best friend, or I'm trying to think if there's other ones that I would really look at it, but I can't, as an astrologer, when you see it work a particular way so many times, it's hard to be like, and this and this and this and this. Mostly I'm going to see that as our serious relationships. Okay. And then we have our vertical axes. So the IC down at the bottom, the Imam Coeli. I went a little bit out of order here from how I put it in this slide, but that's okay. The Imam Coeli, it starts the fourth house. The Imam Coeli, or IC, is our roots, our home, our family of origin. It is how we were raised, for the most part. Now, it also talks about the friends that we had back in the day. For example, if like when Jupiter has crossed my IC before, all of a sudden, like, people I haven't talked to in 15 years are like, hey girl, what's up? You know? But it very much is about like where we came from and how we view that family of origin. And then opposite of that, up high, so this is like our private life, where we came from. Up higher, the midheaven, or medium Coeli, up at the top, is how our status, our reputation, how we're functioning out in the world. That is the very pivotal part of the chart for career. So when somebody comes to me and they say, what should I do for a living? I'm going to be looking obviously the whole chart, but a lot of what I'm going to be looking at, first thing is I'm going to look at the MC, the midheaven. I'm going to look at the 6th house, the day-to-day routine, the day-to-day work. But the difference in those is one is more just kind of the daily grind, the 6th house. The midheaven is much more about what are you known for? My midheaven is Gemini. And Geminis do a lot of this. And I would probably say that's fitting. I'll take that. I'll take it. I'll take that hit, right? So that's the MC, the midheaven. So as you know, this class was shot live, and I'm coming back later to clear up a huge astrological misconception that most people don't really understand and get wrong, and we're going to just make this crystal clear before we move on. And that's about cusps. A lot of times people will say they were born on a cusp if they were born on the day before or the day after the sun changed signs. See, when you're saying I am a Scorpio, what you're saying actually is I have a Scorpio sun. The sun was in Scorpio when I was born. Now let's say that you were born on October 22nd. You might say, oh, I'm a Libra Scorpio cusp, but that's actually not true, because there are 30 degrees in every sign. Therefore, if you were born right at the beginning of that zodiacal season or right at the end of it, you are very, very much that sign. You're not a little bit of this sign and a little bit of that sign. Now, you might resonate a little bit with the energy of the other sign, and that's probably because you have other planets in that sign close by. For example, Mercury and Venus are never more than 2 signs away from the sun. So it's very common to have your sun, for example, I have my sun in Scorpio and I have my Mercury in Sagittarius. So I pick up that Sagittarius energy with my Mercury. So you're definitely not a cusp. There's no such thing as cusps as far as being a cusp baby or whatever in astrology. There is such thing as a cusp, but that's not what we're referring to. When we refer to a cusp in astrology, we're actually referring to the exact point that that house, because there's 12 houses in astrology, 12 houses, 12 signs, that house begins. So if we say the cusp of the 2nd house is in Leo, we're saying the very beginning of the 2nd house begins in the sign of Leo. Hopefully that makes sense. We're gonna get all of this together. It all makes sense later. It's gonna come together. Stick with me, I promise. You got this. Thanks for watching.